So once upon a time, there were three guys, Rink and Michael and Jonathan. And they worked together at this food co-op in New England. And they had this dream. They wanted to start a fair trade movement that would respect workers, pay them a living wage, and be caring of the earth. And so they begged and borrowed from their family and got $100,000 together, and they went to graduate school, and they spent 3 years meeting weekly, trying to come up with some kind of plan for a fair trade company. And they did. They started a company in 1986 called Equal Exchange. For any of you who buy fair trade stuff, that's kind of like the gold standard, really, for coffee and tea and chocolate and a lot of other products. And it was a really hard work. This was during the wars in Central America, and they were trying to build solidarity movements really with small farmers there and create co-ops. And it took them 3 years to break even. And at year 5, they had $1 million in sales. They got to 10 million, they got to 50 million. And it was really hard, difficult work. They were managing this company. The top person couldn't make more than 5 times what the bottom person made. And if you know, in Germany and England, the average CEO makes 20 times, in Venezuela, 50. In the United States, the average CEO makes what? 450 times what the lowest worker makes, right? So they're really going against the grain. But then when they celebrated their 25th anniversary, this guy, Rink Dickinson, who's a great thinker and writer, wrote this paper and said fair trade is dead. And they pulled out of the certification process. They didn't change what they were doing. They kept and they continue to try to build, responsible relationships with especially farmers in the developing world. It wasn't just that they weren't successful, that they were doing really good work, that they had really changed and transformed thousands of lives in many villages. But they were a speck, right? Just a tiny speck of the way food is produced and traded. And at the same time, you've all seen these stories, around Easter, every year Easter, there's a story, the chocolate we put in our kids' Easter baskets, it's harvested by children in other places, right? Like 1.5 million just in Ghana and Burkina Faso, some kids as young as 5, right? So that's kind of the way the overall food system works. But it wasn't just that they weren't successful. In some ways, the challenge was they were successful, that they began to talk so much about fair trade and sustainability, and American consumers began to think, well, I really don't want to buy chocolate that's made by children who are slaves and people who are working in sweatshops. And so there began to be a more demand for fair trade. So the big companies and the big grocery chains are like, yeah, we're all over fair trade. They really didn't have any interest in working with these challenging groups like Equal Exchange. And so they decided that Nestle and Hershey's and Cadbury and all those people would be fair trade. And what happened was they kind of watered down the fair trade standards so that, well, you can have 5-year-olds harvesting your coffee and chocolate, and we'll just go ahead and call it fair trade, right? And so the whole process, and it's true when you think about sustainability and organic, some of those words and those standards have been sort of watered down. So you really have to kind of sadly do your research as a consumer, which is really hard. But until we get politicians who care about this and embrace this and decide to outlaw single-use plastic, we're kind of all out here. So listening to him though, and his kind of challenging words made me think again about what we talked about 2 weeks ago. My friend who's therapist in the complicated family dynamics, whose therapist kept saying, you can't fix that, right? So on this Earth Day, we look around the world, and if we're honest, we can't fix it, right? We can't fix all of it. And at the same time, I think about how that is to our own bodies as well, not just the challenges we face in this country. Several years ago, there was a guy named Bruce Kramer. He was a musician, and he was a professor at one of the colleges in Minnesota. He was 55, his life was good, they had an empty nest, they were traveling the world and having good wine and food, and then the doctor said, you've got ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. Anybody who knows anything about that knows that is not what you want, right? That is the most brutal. If you have any family, we do, oh my gosh, you know how it is. It just takes away your whole life. And he wrote a book called We Know How This Ends, because everybody knows how that ends. And he was on NPR for about 5 years. Some of you may remember, it's been a number of years ago, but he kind of journaled his death and his demise. But he said something in an interview that has stuck with me for close to 10 years and comes back to me. And he said at some point he realized that the question, is not how can we fix this or how do I battle this, but how shall we grow into the demands of that which is beyond us? That's a profound, how shall we grow into the demands of that which is beyond us? And that has come to me as a pastor so many times. We have a young woman in our community. She grew up in a lovely home in the suburbs. Her mother was the normal mother. Then when she was a late teenager, her mother developed this psychosis, and her mother lives in a car, right? And this is a hard thing for kids in their 20s to manage. And we have other people in our community who have children who just, the illnesses of their mind, right? The struggles of addiction, and the parents try and do so much. How shall we grow into the demands of that which is beyond us? And we have others, whose body is racked and just can't be healed. And then there's just the normal world of aging. I've thought with my mom and dad, looking at their loss of vision and their loss of hearing and their loss of mobility. How shall we grow into the demands of that which is beyond us? And in the big world. So I flew to Texas for a funeral and to help my parents and flew back. And I know flying is complicated because it's not good for the earth either, but I take my reusable water bottle, right? So at least I'm not using the plastic cup. But the guy next to me more than made up for it because he had 2 or 3 drinks, and then he pulled out his NRA magazine. Oh my gosh. The guy on the other side was like, what is that when you're looking for somebody on a dating app? So he was going as fast as he could. I was like, I had guns over here and women over here, and I was just like, I'm just trying to work on my sermon. Really, guys? Can you? But, so how do we live in this world, which can feel kind of overwhelming and like whatever we try, is it really going to matter? The early Christians must have felt the same because they over and over depicted themselves as sheep. I kind of got a sense of this in 2006. I went to Turkey with a really good friend who teaches theology at University of Chicago and 2 PhD students there in early Christian origins who are brilliant. One is now a religion professor at TCU. It's almost impossible, anybody knows, to get a professorship anymore in the liberal arts. It was like traveling through the early church with these docents from a museum. Like everywhere we went, Brandon and Tish and Chris just saw so much that I would have missed. And we went into some of these earliest caves where some of the earliest Christians worshiped. And you could see these really rudimentary paintings on the walls. And they weren't like we might think, well, they would be Jesus and the disciples or Jesus feeding the 5,000. Some of the earliest images were always images of escape, like Daniel in the lion's den and Jonah in the mouth of the well. And the Christians over and over again portrayed themselves as sheep. It was like little kids with orange crayons, like those kind of chubby little sheep with the little sticks. And I remember Tish, who's brilliant, but grew up in Missouri and was real involved in 4-H, went to MU. She just kept saying, I cannot believe sheep are the dumbest animals ever. She's like, they're just so dumb. Why would they do that? And I remember her telling a story about she had her border collie and she was trying to herd her grandpa's sheep, and they were in a pen, and the sheep just kept running around in circles, just bloody in their nose, running into the fence over and over and over again. And she said her grandpa's not happy with her, but she's like, they're just the dumbest animals. And hearing that, right? I mean, have we not felt that way in our own lives? Like these sheep and the wolf is at the door and the thieves are there, and you are just running in circles, hitting your face against the fence over and over and over again. So there wasn't just this understanding that like we're like these sheep, right? Call my name and bring me home and keep me safe. There's also this image of this good shepherd. And so these beautiful words from the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, right? This one makes me lie down in green pastures, leads me beside the still waters, and restores my soul. I mean, this is a God who wants us to rest, right? Who says, just take it easy and breathe. And then, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, right? For thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. So a rod and a staff, this is like, the image. In Hebrew, it's the same word, but it's the queen's scepter or the king's scepter. It's the monarch, and it's the shepherd. This one who watches over us is in charge, but is also tender, right? This tough, tender one who is caring for us. And then this one, does what? Prepares a table for me in the presence of my enemies, right? So the folks are trying to hurt me, and I am right here feasting. And it gets even better because this God, who is this loving, caring, protective one, expects something from us, right? Says what? God leads me in the paths of right sake. God wants us to go down a right path. And justice and mercy shall pursue me all the days of my life. It's not follow, it's pursue, right? It's this one is coming after us and wants us to do the right thing. Not once, but for all of our life. Justice and mercy shall pursue me. I mean, you can't step back from it. You have to stay in the work. You have to keep at it. So I've been thinking more about Rink Dinkinson, the founder of Equal Exchange, one of the founders, and what he said. Because he says right now he thinks we're in a really difficult moment because we don't know what to do. And he said it was easier in the 80s because there were the solidarity movements and we were all out there. And now, after 2011, the country or 2001, September 11th, the country turned inward. And he said it feels like we are just wandering around. And we don't like to be in that place. It's an uncomfortable place. We want to be in a place where we know what to do. So it says in this difficult moment, you've got to stay in the movement and keep going and hope that eventually a model will come along that you can grab onto and follow. And I've been trying to do that. So this year, I've been like trying to learn from these wise people at Equal Exchange, and I've gone on a bunch of their webinars to see kind of how they're shaping community. And they have a lot of webinars that are about one of my favorite subjects. That would be chocolate. And some of them, like you send in the money, and then they send you these fair trade chocolate bars, and then they show you about the cacao, the beans, and how they make it, and the farmers. And then at the end, they have like a chocolate tasting thing, and it's just beautiful seeing how these farmers and how these communities build and live. And then there have been some about nuts and fruits, and for me, just to learn more about community and life and what it is we consume. And usually there's 50, 100 people maybe on the webinar. And then at the end of November, I was on a webinar with them, and there was like 600 or 700 people. And it was a webinar about olive oil, about Palestinian olive oil. And a lot of people were on there because it was the end of November. It was 7 weeks after October 7th. And if you know anything about olive oil and the Palestinian culture, it's like 14% of their gross domestic product. It is like the way people pass on culture. It's like this tradition of, caring for the olive trees and harvesting and celebrating, and they use the oil to like make soap and make all kinds of, it is like their heritage. And it's just the most beautiful, incredible thing. And they work with this group called the Palestinian Agriculture Relief Committee that they've worked with for 40 years. They have planted 4 million olive trees since they started. They've trained 4,500 people in training programs. They've got 1,200 engineers they've trained, and they've got 80 protection committees. The reason they have protection committees is because if you know anything about it, you know that harvesting olive oil is a very dangerous thing for Palestinians. This is when they're targeted. Since 1967, there's been something like 800,000 olive trees pulled up, right? And right now, intentionally, Palestinians are killed when they go out to try to harvest. And it's because of the Israeli settlers. The Israeli settlers, they're not the best people in Israeli society. There's a lot of people in Israeli society who do want peace, not the settlers. When you hear the word Israeli settlers, just kind of substitute capital 6, January 6 Capitol rioters. That's who they are, right? They're not just out there, it used to be they're out there with their guns and they're shooting at the Palestinians and maybe the Israeli army's looking the other way. Now, no. They're giving them the guns and they're giving them the uniforms. And it's just unbelievably devastating. It's devastating if West Bank you have to Google West Bank and get it to pull up, but it's just been so hard. And so the 600 or 700 people were on the webinar because they were all saying the same thing. Are these people even still alive, and how are people making it? Because it's the whole economy collapsing. And the thing I remember about that webinar the most, I cannot for some reason find it in my notes, how unbelievably beautiful the whole thing was. I mean, they kept showing these pictures of all these people, and some of you are wine connoisseurs, I'm I don't pay more than $7 for a bottle of wine, but some people, they're real into that. People are real into olive oil. I mean, you have no idea, this olive oil, it is not like something you get at Costco, right? And the process of it, the way you plant these trees, the way you care for the trees, the organic process, and showing these incredible people, harvesting the olives, and then the olive press, and then packaging, and then just the incredible way this trade and this gift is passed on. And I keep thinking about something else that Rink Dinkinson said. He said, now we're in the stage of wandering around, we're not sure where to go. And the question he's asking now is, would you like to be a part of a really tiny model that's trying to challenge a world system that oppresses most people? And what could be the answer, right? Do you not want to be a part of it? I mean, do you want to be a part of this tiny little movement like Peace Church, right? We're just, you all, tiny little movement, right? It's trying to change a world. It oppresses most people. Sure, of course. What's the other choice? And I keep thinking about our own bodies too. Think about what Bruce Kramer said, the guy with ALS, last 5 years of his life with that journey, how yoga, of all things, became so important to him. He was blessed. Some of you know Matthew Sanford. He's a very famous yoga teacher. He was up in the Twin Cities or wherever, and he works a lot with people who are disabled in yoga. He himself is a quadriplegic. And Kramer would talk about the gift of yoga, and especially at the end, it took 3 people to put him on the floor and 3 people to move his arms and legs into the different postures. And I keep thinking about our little church, right? The day when we're on the floor, we can't move. I mean, are you willing to be that vulnerable and open, right? To let people move you and touch you and to be a part of that. So the question again is, how can we look more resurrected? And what would it look like in our own lives for us to try to follow this good shepherd who cares and protects, and for all of us to live as people who serve, who care, who protect. Amen.